So thank you. So I have a question about the title of the book. And maybe
Very creative title.
well,
What's this book about? How many novels does he cover?
If you read the introduction to the book, you actually reveal your preferred opening title,
Yeah.
Which is simply read more books.
It was read another book.
Read another book.
Yeah.
Read another book.
Yeah. So first of all, the title is very blunt, and I tried very hard to come up with something more creative. And one original idea was read another book, which is a reference to a meme that was going around a few years ago, because especially on the left, whenever a Republican did something terrible, that person became a Harry Potter villain. And conservatives responded to that by saying, read another book. Not everything is about Harry Potter. At least, call this politician Richard III or something. Not everybody's Voldemort. But then the publisher pointed out, if you call your book "Read Another Book," the potential buyer might take you up on it. And read another book. So that was good advice. And the thing about this title, 13 Novels Conservatives Will Love, is sometimes when I'm introduced, he's the author of 13 novels conservatives will love, which makes it sound like I've written 13 novels conservatives will love, and I have not. I've written a couple short stories conservatives might like. But we could talk more about this, but another element of the title is that I don't call these conservative novels because I think that reduces the novels. They're all complex novels, and there are plenty of ideas there in some of the novels that conservatives may not like, and so they're not necessarily completely conservative novels. But conservatives will like the novels because they have a lot of ideas that conservatives like talking about and agree with, and tones that are sympathetic to conservatives.
So you probably remember at lunch today when you were with some students, one of the students said, I'm really curious to know about this book because when I think of conservative novels or looking at novels in politics, I think of 1984 and Animal Farm, and that's exactly what you're addressing in the introduction.
Well, that's the parenthetical part of the title, but probably haven't read. If you talk to conservatives about fiction they like, if they like fiction, and many don't, they will talk about the same handful of novels, and most of those are good. So, Lord of the Rings, 1984. At Thomas More College, a lot of them will probably say Brideshead Revisited, and I'm just doing English language original ones. I had to limit my book, so that was one of the limitations I chose. And then there's Ayn Rand in there. So, and again, most of those are good, but I think what happens is, of course, Tom Wolfe, Bonfire of the Vanities in particular. The problem with that is that we kind of get in a rut, and I don't want to dissuade anybody from reading those books, but we, I think, blind ourselves to the vast array of literature that's out there, and in the process limit our conversations and limit our understanding of conservatism and what it might entail, because a lot of these novels explore things that some of the novels we talk about do not explore. And at the same time, blind ourselves to some of the great authors who are writing in what might be called a conservative tradition. I think the best example of that is a novel I included here, which is probably the novel younger readers are most familiar with, Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God. If you're older, you probably have not encountered that book because she had a renaissance really in the late 70s, and now only one female writer is assigned more often than her in college courses, and it's Mary Shelley. Frankenstein is the only work by a female author assigned more often. than their eyes were watching God. And when Zora Neale Hurston's Renaissance first began, it was kind of as a black feminist, part of that movement. And there is no doubt that there is that element to their eyes were watching God. But in my chapter about that, I try to point out that it's not as straightforward as that argument seems. And also, Zora Neale Hurston, which isn't true of every author I write about in this book, she was a loud and proud Republican in her life, and that meant she was not embraced by a lot of African American writers and critics at the time. This novel in particular was criticized for basically, nobody called her an Uncle Tom, but that's basically what they called her, because she was just writing for white people. That's not how she's understood at all anymore. But in her lifetime, she was a Republican. She hated communists. She hated the NAACP. She hated trade unions. I think that's an element of conservatism and an element of her life that is lost now. And even though she's read very often, that element of her intellectual life and of Their Eyes Were Watching God has just kind of dropped out of the conversation.
That novel was actually on my master's comps when I was in
Oh, really?
graduate school.
Yeah.
So it was one of the books that I had to read.
Yeah.
That was in the early 90s.
Yeah.
So, and I think it was the first time
Yeah,
it was first being
right.
discovered and read.
That makes
in the
sense.
Academy.
John McWhorter, the columnist for the New York Times, says that she is America's favorite black conservative. But like a lot of people don't even know she's conservative, or was. And then he said she would have been as comfortable on Fox News as on NPR. And if you read some of her essays in particular, I think you get the sense of how you would say that.
So, talk a little bit more about what you mean by conservative.
Yeah.
You allude
Yeah.
to particular authors and
Mhm.
qualities in the introduction and throughout the book, but
Yeah, conservatism is, as an idea, kind of in flux. It has been over the past 10 years. I don't know why. So what I try to do, part of what I'm doing in this book is focusing on ideas, tenets, principles that have been part of mostly the American conservative movement over the past, say, 60 years or so. And my hope is that this gets conservatives to think more deeply about what they believe, what principles they hold. And of course, if you don't agree with one of these tenets, that doesn't mean you're not conservative. Conservatism isn't just a checklist. But I think most conservatives would read this book and kind of and nod along with some of the principles, most if not all the principles I'm outlining here. So those include things like the existence of an enduring human nature, a human nature that transcends time and place. That doesn't mean all cultures are the same. It doesn't mean all people are the same, but certain basic desires, abilities, vices, and virtues are common to all people. I explore that especially in my first chapter about Samuel Johnson's Rascalist. And that is a fundamentally conservative idea, especially now, when progressives tend to believe, and have for a long time, that you can change human nature, you can change people. If you just put them in the right conditions, people will act like angels. And conservatives understand that that's because of our fallen human nature. That's not really the case. And that really frustrates utopians and totalitarians, because they want to change human nature. They want to, they like to think that we're more like blank slates. I look also at along those same lines, the inevitable frustrations and failures of utopian states. I look at that through Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Blithedale Romance, which is about an agrarian commune. This small group of dreamers gets together and thinks that they can basically, again, reform human nature, with these socialist principles, and they think that, well, over the course of the novel, the narrator realizes that every generation has really thought it's very different from their predecessors, and eventually they realize, no, they're actually not that much different, and there's a lot of wisdom to be gained from the past, the virtues and the mistakes of the past. And then in a chapter on V.S. Naipaul's A Bend in the River, I look at, I guess, the delusions of post-colonialism, and a lot of, along with the dangers of a victim mentality. Just how easy it is to blame problems on other people and not recognizing and foregoing your agency, the control you have over your own life. There are, and then, sorry, I'll just give one more example. Walter Scott's Waverley is a very Burkean novel. It is kind of, Russell Kirk said Walter Scott did more to popularize Edmund Burke's Reflections on the Revolution in France than any of Burke's pamphlets could have. And Waverley in particular is in large part about the dangers of trying to implement radical change as opposed to incremental change. It's a very Burkean idea. So in every chapter I try to locate or identify, explore a different conservative theme in every novel. Some of the novels touch on multiple ones, and there's a lot of overlap between the novels, but in all of them I'm trying to really focus on something different. I could have done a whole book about just novels that look at the dangers of radicalism, but you get the idea after one or two.
Thank you. So when I think about the novel and the experience of reading a novel, I mean, the word novel means new,
Yeah.
Something that's new. And when the novel kind of arrives on the scene, it's, I've read various accounts of why it does, how it does. It's a kind of privatization of the
Yeah.
reading experience.
Mm-hmm.
So in what way is the genre itself, is it a conservative genre? And is there something about the way in which a novel unfolds and what you're allowed to do in a novel that might make it particularly appropriate for gaining the kinds of qualities?
I think as a genre or as a form, I think it's neutral. It's not necessarily conservative, but it is certainly amenable to conservatism. I think presently in our day, reading a novel is a conservative act in a way, and even if a progressive is doing it, they're engaging in kind of an old-fashioned, unfortunately fading activity that fewer and fewer people are doing. So it is conservative in that regard. I think, in some ways, again, this is probably neutral, but I think one of the reasons the novel took off in the 18th century the way it did, and the way it's endured as a form, Lionel Trilling said that, he's a 20th century critic, he said that no form has shaped the Western moral imagination more than the novel has over the past 200 years. I think that's probably right. But it emerged in the 18th century, I think in part because in Britain, they were especially concerned with ideas of sympathy and what they would call fellow feeling, and we might call empathy now. And I think that's why the novel it's one of the reasons the novel is such a valuable form. Many great novels, not all great novels, many great novels immerse you into the consciousness of people, of a character who does not think like you, is not like you at all. And if it's a good novel, you are convinced that consciousness is credible and is convincing and is compelling, and you may not like it, you might not agree with the actions that those characters perform, but you understand it, and you kind of have some of the same emotions, or react intensely to the emotions that the characters feel. That was all coming out of this 18th century concern with sympathy. Like thinkers like Adam Smith and David Hume and many others were really interested in why is it that we react this way to other people's experiences and emotions, and even fictional or dramatic characters' feelings and emotions. And the novel really took that idea and ran with it, and I think you see it's the peak in novelists like Jane Austen, and especially I think George Eliot, and we still get that a lot today. But I always hedge on that because, as I was saying before, not every great novelist does that. Evelyn Waugh, for example, isn't that concerned with having you develop sympathy for many of his characters. I write about Scoop, and that's a satire. And you don't, you laugh at characters and you feel bad for some characters here and there, but most of the characters you just laugh at, and you think they're fools. And then the central character, you root for him, but he's not a man of great emotional depth, really, that you sympathize with any great deal. Flannery O'Connor once complained that she really disliked how novelists were always praised for their compassion. The idea being that human nature is flawed, so therefore flaws are okay, and you really shouldn't condemn them. And she hated that idea. And so in a lot of her works, you're supposed to condemn what people do. She doesn't have a lot of sympathy for the characters she's drawing in some cases. And Pope Francis, too, a couple of years ago, he wrote a really interesting letter about how the reading of literature can shape your faith, form your faith. And he said what I was saying earlier about how great literature can develop your sympathetic imagination. But then he goes on to say, that doesn't mean that you suspend judgment when you read works of literature. What it means is great literature helps you arrive at your judgments more fully and in a more informed way.
So you've used the term neutral a couple of
Yeah.
times. Do you think, because when you're talking about empathy in the introduction, you quote Obama and what he says about empathy in the novel.
Let me be clear. I'm going to paraphrase a quote he has, and I think he's really thoughtful on this. When I think about what I got from fiction, the most important thing I got from it was how to have sympathy, and that made me a better citizen. The notion that not everything's black or white; there are shades of gray. It's important in democracy. I think that's right. A lot of great fiction does that. And he also goes on to say that one of the authors he goes back to pretty often is V.S. Naipaul. And V.S. Naipaul and Barack Obama don't agree on very much. But Obama, to his credit, goes back and reads. I think he specifically mentioned the book I write about, A Bend in the River, to get kind of this counter view of human nature and politics. And I would say that's important. With this book, I don't mean to suggest conservatives should only read books that confirm their priors or develop their beliefs, but if they are looking for books that do that, these are great for that.
So could you simply swap out the title and call it 13 Novels Liberals Will Love?
Well, yes, that's important. The number one criterion for inclusion in this book is that it had to be a great novel. And so I think that liberals will love all of these books. But they will react differently to some of the ideas. And I think that a lot of these books would be good introductions to liberals to conservative thinking. So if a liberal wants to understand, let's see. To bring up a novel I haven't mentioned yet, P.D. James's Children of Men. If they want to understand why we might be getting ourselves in trouble with our current birth rates and the fact that nobody's having children anymore, P.D. James's novel is a great dystopian vision of what that future could look like, and in some ways we're already seeing it come true. So this novel was published in 1992, and the premise is that people can no longer reproduce. When the novel begins, the youngest person on the planet has just died a senseless death at the age of 25. And so we're getting, that kind of shakes everybody up and drives home the fact that the human race is doomed. So if nobody's having kids, what does that mean? Well, it means that people, as P.D. James shows, people want different things from their government. They just want comfort and they just want security. So we get that. And then the government, in turn, because they're not really getting a lot from the citizens, they can only support so many citizens, they have to encourage some citizens to die. So there is a robust euthanasia program, and you're seeing that a little bit up north. Again, she wrote this in 1992. She was ahead of the curve there. Also, of course, everybody's having a ton of pets in this novel because they can't have children. So I think I think people would. It was adapted into a movie, and which kind of the movie misses the point of the novel in some ways, but it was an exciting enough novel to get Hollywood's attention, and I think I think more than conservatives would like this novel. But I would encourage liberals, and I would encourage liberals to read it to kind of get a sense of what some of us are worried about.
So I think, again, I mentioned to you that of all the novels in here, there's one that is consistently taught at Thomas More College, which you actually say is technically not a novel.
Yeah, it's not, but I have a footnote about that, but I couldn't resist.
Right. So that's Samuel Johnson's Rasselas.
Yes.
So could you say a little bit about?
Yeah, Rasselas it's technically an Oriental tale, which people don't write anymore, and probably not even allowed to use that word. Sorry. It's essentially kind of a travel narrative. But the premise of that extended fictional narrative is that a young prince Prince of Abyssinia lives in, the title character, Rasselas, lives in a place called Happy Valley, not in Pennsylvania. He is not an Indy Lions fan. But he has everything he wants from life. No desire or need is not met. He's constantly entertained. But he's bored, and he knows that there must be something else. And so he encounters a wise older man there, poet/philosopher named Imlac, who talks to him, and Rasselas realizes he needs to see some of the world so that he can make a choice in life, a choice of life. And that was the working title of the book, A Choice of Life. And so he goes out and he, with a couple of companions, explores the world, and he recognizes that the world is full of disappointments. I need to quote this one sentence. I want to make sure I get it right. One of my favorite lines from the novel, and when I was telling somebody that I was including this book in my book, he recited this line. He was very happy, and he recited this line to me. He read the novel, the Oriental Tale 50 years ago, but he remembered this line: "Human life is everywhere a state in which much is to be endured and little is to be enjoyed." And that's a very depressing statement. But it's also true. Most of what we do every day is not really enjoyable. I mean, this obviously is enjoyable, but the drive here wasn't enjoyable, probably. You had to do it. And when you go home, you have to wash the dishes. That is not enjoyable, but you have to do it. Most of life is just doing things you need to do, and not things that you're necessarily going to enjoy. You can turn on a podcast and get distracted from what you're doing, but you'd still rather not be doing that thing. There are lessons like that in Rasselas, and there are also lessons about how, in some ways, Johnson celebrates the power of reason, but he also points out the limits of reason. And so there are some characters there who are very wise people who they don't go crazy, but one of them goes crazy, but they're not capable of exercising their reason the way they instruct others to do. One is a philosopher who's basically a stoic, and he instructs people to overcome passions, control what they want, control their emotions, not get too high, not get too low. But then I think his daughter dies, and what do you know? He's unable to implement any of the things he had taught, and he's just a mess. And so it's about, in large part, about the limits of human reason, and as I was suggesting before, it's about how these things, these vices, these virtues, these ambitions go across culture and go across time. I should say, Rasselas and his peers are young. They're exploring the world to figure out what to do in life. And what they realize, and something Imlach tells them, is that human nature involves restlessness. Rasselas, I think, is a pun. Rasselas is, I think, a pun on restless. There's this constant desire to get out and do something, to have some sort of goal. And if once you lose that desire, you are just not going to be a very happy person. But then when you achieve that desire, you have to recognize that you're not going to be satisfied for very long. And you're going to want to go on to a new desire and a new ambition, a new goal. A couple of the books I write about here, George Eliot's Daniel Deronda's is the one that especially stands out, is in large part about young people figuring out what they should do with their lives and not really being happy or satisfied until they figure out what that purpose is. And I think that we see that in Rasselas, and the novel ends very strangely because all of the characters say, all right, here's what I'm going to do. Now that we've been exploring, we're going to go back to Abyssinia, and they all have different things that they're going to do. But it's clear that none of them are actually going to do everything they want to do. They're not going to fulfill their goals. But they've learned enough to recognize and to understand that's okay. The important thing is to have that goal, to have that sense of purpose, to keep moving, to stay active, and not to get mired down. There's this running motif in the work of movements in the form of the Nile that they're flowing along, and it becomes clear that human life should be like the Nile, always moving, always flowing, always going towards something.
So we live in an age where language is constantly getting reevaluated, things are getting redefined, and especially for young people, it's hard to get a measure of what they're reading, what they should look for, what they value. And I think of this term relatable as it applies to, we constantly, occasionally, my students say, well, I liked that because it was relatable.
Yeah.
And I get a little bit bristly when they say that.
And another variation on that is students want to read about people who look like them. That's a version of that.
But we also have this context in which we're being told that we have to celebrate difference.
Yeah.
And so it's very hard for young people to figure out, how am I supposed to be reading? What am I supposed to be looking for? Is it someone who looks like me?
Yeah.
Or am I supposed to, that other great common expression, lean into the differences? Or what exactly am I looking for?
Well, if I may quote another internet meme, why not both? I love novels where I feel like the character is a lot like me. That's why I don't know. I don't give too much away if I name particular novels. But then, what's a novel about a really good-looking genius? I think that's good. Security. I think that I think it's true that people like reading about characters like them. But if you, and this goes back to my qualification that I don't think conservatives should only read novels that explore conservative ideas. It's one of the great joys of fiction is reading about people totally different from you. I was talking to some of you earlier about a novel I just read set in Delhi, mostly during the 1980s. I know nothing about India in the 1980s. I learned a lot about it from this novel. The characters were a little bit familiar to me because for different reasons, but the lives they were living were like nothing I had experienced myself. They were Hindus. I am not Hindu. I know very little about that religion. And I loved the novel because the novelist was really good. And these characters, though not always likable, were fascinating. And I think if you only limit yourself to novels that are full of characters like you're missing out. But that term relatable is interesting too, because I think it can mean different things. It can mean this character is like me, but in a broader sense, I think it can mean I understand that character. And you can if you're reading a great novelist, you can understand a character who's nothing like you. One of the reasons I love Daniel Deronda is the title character. A common knock on this novel is that the title character is just too perfect. His biggest problem is like, that job interview, what's your biggest flaw? Oh, I just have too much compassion. That's Daniel Deronda's problem. But there's the other main character is a young woman named Gwendolyn Harleth, who is the opposite of him, and she's very selfish. She's hilarious, she's smart, but she's snooty and spoiled and beautiful. So she can get away with the other stuff. And I don't like her very much, but I love reading about her because I find her fascinating and because George Eliot is, one of the best people to have ever written anything. And so I think how we understand the idea of relating to a character really, it should be an expansive understanding, in large part based on just what a novelist can pull off.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you say in that chapter on Willa Cather, it is a paradox of great art that proper attention to the specific and particular can convey universals.
Yeah.
And I think that's what happens oftentimes in fiction is
Yeah.
that in some strange way, precisely because it's so unfamiliar, it is more familiar.
Yeah, if you're a curious person, you will, reading a good writer, you will be interested in these very, these things you're not familiar with. I mean, one of my favorite things about My Antonia is the description of the landscape of Nebraska. I've never been to Nebraska, but the way she evokes the landscape and just the beautiful imagery in a few passages in that novel, I just want to read over and over again because it is, as you said, so particular. And this comes to something else, I think a related issue of what this term that's applied to some writers like Eudora Welty, I know you like, or Flannery O'Connor, every Catholic is required to like. And they're called regional writers. And I think Cather is sometimes lumped in that same description. With that, one of my recent podcast guests, Brooke Allen, a literary critic, was complaining to me about that term, and I think this is an accurate complaint. It just means, a regional writer just means you're writing about a region critics don't know much about. Because, people who base everything in New York City, they're never called regional writers because the critics are familiar with it. But regional writers can be wonderful because the particular is so foreign to us, but they can glean generalities from it. And Cather in particular is especially good at that because she brings classical and biblical references and images to this very particular and unfamiliar landscape of the plains. My Antonia is full of biblical references, like there's a snake. There at one point, Antonia is picking apples from a tree, and I think Virgil from the Georgics is epigram to the work, so epigraphs to the work. So she's clearly bringing in all of these references that have universal connotations in service for this very particular and specifically located story.
Well, I have a million more questions, but I don't want to hog the conversation, and maybe I'll come back to some of those.
Okay.
But I would like to allow some of our guests to ask questions.
Wonderful.
So if you can project, I won't pass this around, but if you have a faint voice, I can hand it to you. So are there any questions for Dr. Scalia? Yes.
Well, I'm kind of worried about the nebulousness of conservatism. It sounds like synodality. So, so I was wondering,
Well, I was going to have a synod on conservatism after this.
I was wondering, would you say a good shorthand for conservatism might be a worldview shaped by belief in traditional
Yeah.
Judeo-Christian morality?
I think that's a component of it, yes. I think there are a lot of people who have that same belief who wouldn't call themselves conservatives, but I think most conservatives have that. I think most conservatives, I touch on this in my book, have a belief in the divine. Not all conservatives do, but even those who don't at least have a respect for those who do, and recognize the value of religious belief in shaping moral behavior and in virtue. I think those are very important things. In my chapter on A Bend in the River, I think a number of the chapters, but especially maybe Bend in the River, these post-colonial governments are very excited to throw out everything that their colonizers had brought. For understandable reasons, but what Naipaul does is show how foolish that is, because not everything there was bad. And also, if you just throw out traditions that have been part of a culture and a nation for generations, bad things will happen, because it's a very Burkean idea of slow change and integration is much more likely to sustain itself and to help the people flourish than sudden top-down change. But yeah, I think that's certainly the belief in a tradition based on Judeo-Christian ideas is at the heart of most conservatism, or one of the multiple hearts of most conservatism. But,
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that what you just articulated is the definition there is something Roger Scruton, the late British philosopher, conservative philosopher, felt about the conservative, that it was about tradition, about preservation, more than it was about revolution or change.
Yeah.
So it's an anti-Rousseauian kind of
Yeah.
notion.
You'll be happy to know I quote Scruton a number of times.
Good for you.
And
Buy your book.
yeah, that's right. I think I should have probably mentioned this before. In every chapter, I try to bring in a pretty familiar conservative thinker: Russell Kirk, Roger Scruton, William F. Buckley, and many others. Burke. In the Willa Cather chapter, I think one of the things that fascinates me about that chapter, or about that novel, the chapter is very fascinating too, is that, the main character, Jim Burden, the primary narrator, he is in the railroad business, and he is developing America. He's bringing change to the country, progress. That's not me, is it? It's like, am I sneezing into this microphone? But the change it's beneficial change. It's not like he's throwing up a bunch of McMansions that don't belong there. and it becomes clear, and when he returns home from the Northeast, he returns to Nebraska, he sees the changes wrought to his hometown, and he's happy about it, because the changes are not radical changes, they're natural developments that show the people there are flourishing and are happier. And the reason he's successful as a railroad engineer, or railroad lawyer, is that the narrator who sets up the frame story, it makes clear that he loves America and he loves the landscape, and that helps him become successful in this job. So it's some conservatives talk about creative destruction, where if you want to develop economically, some things will have to go by the wayside, and that can be uncomfortable, and we see the problems that can create economically and give rise to a populist movement. What Cather shows is a kind of progress that's almost scrutonic, where it's gradual, it's in keeping with the traditions and the people there, and it grows. It's created by people who love the country and understand it, like Jim Burton. And in that chapter, I also spent a couple pages writing about the song by the Pretenders. So there's something for everybody.
Thank you for this conversation. This is lovely.
Thank you for calling me a hunchback earlier.
Just like him. His heart. When you were writing this book and thinking about it through the lens that the title suggests, did you see any books that were trying to be conservative? And whether there's a sort of rub there that the more you try to stake out a political vision, you actually are working against the art of the novel?
Yeah.
Are some of them more or less like that?
I can't.
P.D. James sounds a little bit like there's a statement being made.
Yeah. I think that the two most didactic novels I have here are probably Daniel Deronda and The Children of Men. But they are complicated and nuanced enough to be much more than that. There are elements of, like Daniel Deronda it's a Zionist novel 20 years before the Zionist movement really began. So she's pretty clear in what she thinks is wrong with how Jews were being treated in England at the time. But there's so many other interesting, fascinating, complicated things going on there that I think it's unfair to call it a didactic novel. I can't think of any novels offhand that I read that were just too over the top preachy, and so I didn't include them for that reason. There were this is a fun project because I read a lot of novels I've been meaning to get to, and I reread a lot of novels. There were a lot of novels I didn't include, even though I know conservatives like them, and they're kind of obscure enough to have included. But I just don't like them that much, as much as a lot of other conservatives do. So Cormac McCarthy is one example, and I know a lot of conservative Catholics who like him because he was obviously informed by the King James Bible. He went to Catholic school, and there's something conservative about his understanding of human weakness and flaws in human nature. I don't like his style that much, which is one reason I didn't want to include him. And I don't think I guess his novels are just a little too dark for me. I was already including A Bend in the River, which is a pretty dark novel, but I didn't want to, and I moved chronologically, so a Cormac McCarthy novel would have probably come right after Bend in the River. So that was another reason. And also, I thought a lot of why people like Cormac McCarthy, a lot of those things you also get in Peace Like a River by Leif Unger, and I included that instead. It's kind of a Western. It looks at kind of the dark side of human nature, but it's much more hopeful. And where McCarthy is very subtle in his Christianity, Unger is a lot more open about it. So I've answered a question you didn't ask, but I think I answered it very well. Sorry, if I could just say, I think Ayn Rand is the number one. Many libertarians love her. I just don't think she's, I agree with some of what she says, but I think, was it Whittaker Chambers who wrote the review of her in the National Review? I can't remember if it was him or it was Whittaker Chambers. But his beef in part was that her characters are just, there's not a whole lot to their characters are just vehicles for ideas, and which is okay if you're writing Rassless, but not if the novel's like 500 pages. So I think she's maybe she's an example of maybe somebody I was trying to avoid. Yeah.
I had one question about what you said, that you only picked English language novels, right?
Mm-hmm.
So on that note, is there something lost and or gained when you translate a novel?
Yeah.
And then the other question was, I don't think any of the novels you have mentioned are fantasy or like sci-fi.
Right.
They all seem to be, what would you call it, realistic?
Yeah, literary fiction. I think the exception is, I mean, James is kind of dystopian, but and there's kind of a sci-fi element there. But yes, I did that in part because my background is in literary fiction. I haven't read a ton of sci-fi and fantasy. I'm not a huge fan of that stuff, but there are, obviously the Lord of the Rings and the C.S. Lewis trilogy, the space trilogy. There are definite examples of novels, and I had people.
Dune.
What's that?
Dune.
Dune. I haven't read Dune, but yes, people love it. Yeah. And there are others that, there are other examples, but I just didn't want to. I had to limit myself, and I know literary fiction pretty well. I can write about. I feel much like I have more to say about literary fiction than I do about those other genres. Your first question. Yeah, translations. Something is definitely lost when you translate a work, and I feel more comfortable doing a close reading of something written in the language I'm exploring than a translation of it. So that was one of the reasons. But I certainly don't think people should avoid reading translations. I kept it to the English language. Originals, just again, I just needed some boundaries. So the next one will be 13 foreign language novels conservatives will love. They'll probably have read. But yeah, I mean, I had to.
See the franchise.
Yeah, that's right. It's like getting chicken soup for the conservative soul. But yeah, I mean, if I had done that, I would have had to have included a Russian, and like, which Russian I'm going to upset somebody, and then if I included that, I would have. I wanted to have George Eliot there, or an English, a British Victorian novelist, and I couldn't have two novelists from that era. I'm trying to. There are two novels from the 1930s, but otherwise, I tried to spread it around a bit. So it was really hard choosing these novels, I have to say. So it was tough.
An effort to hear a little bit about your family. Did your dad have liked your choices, liked the book, or your brother Paul, same thing?
Paul likes the book. He told me that. I talked to him a lot about it when I was working on it. And Dad, my mom was the big fiction, still is the big fiction reader. My dad, he had read a lot of fiction, but by the time he was on the court, and he didn't read much except for the summer when he would read, the block, like the Tom Clancy novels or Tom Wolfe novels, things like that. But he remembered what he had read when he was younger very vividly. It was impressive. I remember conversations with him about some novels that he probably hadn't read since college, and the late 50s. But he remembered very vividly, and we had nice conversations about. Yeah, my dad. I know, my dad liked was proud of the career I pursued, and I think he would have. I said my mom was a literary influence. My dad was the influence here on the conservative thinkers I weave into the book, like Burke. My dad was the first person who told me you really need to read Reflections on the Revolution in France. My dad introduced me to Russell Kirk's The Conservative Mind. My dad paid for it was my dad's National Review subscription and First Things magazines I mooched off of when I was growing up and visiting and things like that. So, yeah, I think he would have enjoyed it quite a bit. But, who knows? He liked to surprise you sometimes.
What did you want your readers to take away from this? Do you want their conservatism reinforced? Do you want them to experience life in through these characters in a different way?
I want them to have a not necessarily. Yeah, I think I would want their conservatism to be reinforced, but not necessarily confirmed in every detail I walk through, but to have a more complex and just a fuller understanding of what conservatism can mean. And I hope that they also come away with an appreciation of what fiction can do, what fiction can offer, especially readers who don't read as many novels. Hope they understand some of the elements that make a novel great, the ideas that great novels can work with, the characters that great novels can create, and then the wonders that great novelists can do with the English language, the beauty that you can encounter when you read great fiction. So it's as much about, I want them to get as much about conservatism as they do about literature from the book.
Okay.
I wanted to pick up on something relating again to your father and his very public friendship with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And do you see the project you're undertaking as feeding into the capacity to form friendships, which Aristotle describes as key to our ethical lives? And is there a role for reading?
Absolutely. Yes. Never thought of it like that, but yes. No, well, going back to what I was saying before, I want this book to start conversations and to be the novels I write about to be parts of conversations. It's funny, a lot of my colleagues at the American Enterprise Institute are worried about how antisocial younger people are, especially. They don't spend a lot of time talking to each other. They spend a lot of time online. And here I am saying, go into a room by yourself and read more books. So the act of reading requires isolation, and in some ways we are already more isolated, but it requires quiet, a kind of contemplative isolation that we don't have. But then afterwards, novels can be conducive to conversation, interaction, and as I said, that what you learn about people and human nature from fiction can make you, I think, a better social animal.
Just in light of that, as you were talking about the novel being new and released, I thought of Dickens, which was a serial novel. It was released in pieces.
Yeah.
Do you think there's an opportunity for shorter fiction producing a longer novel, the way that television is a recently released thing, and people are watching Stranger Things and they're watching.
Yeah, people are trying to do that. People are trying to do that on Substack.
Yeah, Ross Douthat.
Yeah, Ross Douthat did, and another friend of mine, Andy Smerick in the DC area, did something similar. They released every week, I think, they released a new chapter. Unfortunately, both of those instances, they did it because publishers wouldn't buy their books. But I think that there's a savvy publisher will start a Substack for a novelist and say, this is a novelist, this book is under contract, but hey, buy these chaps, subscribe, pay every week. And I think that would be a way to, we're never gonna get to the point where people are waiting at the dock to get, you know, the Dickens editions, new novels the way they did, supposedly back then. But, you know, and certainly it might not become water cooler conversation the way like another episode of Game of Thrones was. But it does seem like a clever way to generate buzz and conversation about fiction using those shorter forms.
I have a question.
Yes, Amy?
So, I was at a conference this past weekend, and one of the academics there said, and he was a literature professor, he had been approached by the head of his university's medical school to come up with a fiction reading program for the med school students,
Yeah.
because he was concerned about the burnout, the competitiveness, the lack of community, the lack
Yeah.
of any kind of, you know, conversation or contemplation. And there's been a move in recent years in seminary formation, the same
Mhm.
thing, have the seminarians read literature. So it
Yeah.
seems, do you think there's a kind of, in a strange way, precisely at this moment when, as you suggest at the beginning of your book, reading habits, you know, what is it, the average person, I think, what, 13% read a book in the last year? Or
Yeah, it was 30-some percent,
30
yeah,
some,
but
I
in
think
the
among
early,
young people.
yeah, young people's even
very,
lower.
very low.
Yeah, and this is as opposed to the early 80s when these surveys were first taken by the National Endowment for the Arts. It was the high 50s percent of Americans had read not just a novel, but a work of literature in the past year. Those numbers have dropped by 20% over the past 40 years.
Yeah, but that already people are kind of suspicious of things like AI
Yeah.
replacing, nobody wants to read an AI novel.
Yeah, that's right.
That I've met,
Yeah.
and even people who are excited about the possibilities of
Yeah.
AI in other realms. So that perhaps sitting with an actual book
Yes.
is kind of has the air of authenticity.
Yeah, I think that's right. I talk about this a little bit in the introduction in the context of just a general defense of the humanities and people defending the study of the humanities. Some of them like to say, studying the humanities makes us more human. And that's, I think, an unfortunately condescending way of putting it, because, there are plenty of people who have studied the humanities a lot and are, inhumane in their own ways. And, you don't have to read literature to be a fully formed human, emotionally and otherwise. But studying the humanities, including literature, gives us a deeper understanding of what it actually means to be human. We understand, going back to that term, we understand human nature more fully. I think we understand social behavior more fully. So I think, Jane Austen, I don't write about her in my book. I don't devote a chapter to her because I don't think anybody needs to be told to read more Jane Austen, because everybody knows you should read Jane Austen. And one of the reasons she's excellent and we love her so much today still is that she just has such a keen social eye and is so good at making fun of people who are socially inept. Some of the characters, some of her biggest villains aren't necessarily bad people, but they just don't know how to interact with other people. They can't pick up on social cues. So I would recommend that these med students read Jane Austen if they're, if they want to understand how to pick up social cues or how to engage with other people. She's a good author to start with for that reason. But yeah, it is funny. We still read a lot, but the things we read don't do for us morally and intellectually what fiction does. Like doom scrolling for an hour is not going to develop your understanding of human nature the way a good novel will. In fact, it will certainly make you hate human nature, probably. There's a gentleman right here. There's one there, and then.
Okay. I'm sitting lower, so
Yeah.
if you see that,
Okay.
please.
My question is about culture has changed. Like,
Yeah.
I grew up during the 80s, and we had, movies and
Yeah,
books that were published, and people would actually read it, because we'd take the train into Boston, everything was,
yeah.
rather than on the phone.
And newspapers had book sections that were 50 pages long and full of advertisements, and yeah, books mattered a lot more then.
And now, it's all on the phone, and they're just.
Yeah,
But you can tell what's happening with the Hollywood. There's no meat to anything that they are producing.
Yeah.
To show us something that's uplifting and shows us the humanity of what's going on in life. So that's where the separation of people are. They're stuck on that doom scrolling
Mhm.
rather than experience life. It's very unusual, because if you go to a restaurant, expensive restaurant, you see two people on their phone talking like back and forth, not conversing,
Yeah.
not engaging at all.
yeah.
And it's like sad to see, you
Mhm.
know.
Yeah, I think, I suspect we'll break out of this. I think that we're due for a renewal in the creative arts, and I think part of it will just part is on the artistic end. But I also think that, I don't know if this is true, but I hear rumors and read stories here and there about Gen Zers and whatever the younger generation is after them, getting Gen Alpha. I don't know why we're moving alphabetical. It was Gen X, and that wasn't, we didn't have to go alphabetical after that. Come up with your own ideas, guys. But I think younger people are getting frustrated with what's available to them, and they have a sense. I hope they have a sense, and in some articles I read that they have a sense that the online culture is limited. The iPhone has done real damage to them socially and culturally. So, yeah, I hope that helps spark a renaissance. But it's important for artists to get out there and create things that people can embrace and enjoy. And it's important also for donors and filthy rich people to support the artists doing that, and to support new institutions doing that. So not relying on Hollywood, not relying on higher education, but creating other channels for artists to do these things, and for readers and viewers to encounter them.
Or small liberal arts.
Or small, exactly, small liberal arts, most importantly.
We'll take one more question, and then actually, there are some books available for purchase and signing if anybody would like those. Just come to the corner.
Yeah.
Well, just to sort of wrap us up, you've got 13 books here. If you had to choose a 14th, what would it be? And if you have it on your mind, what conservative thinker would you pair with it?
Excuse me. One of my areas of expertise, if you can call it that, when I was a professor, was 18th century literature. So I really had a hard time choosing just a couple of 18th century novels, because I knew readers wouldn't have much patience for more than a couple. I would include, I think I would have wanted, I seriously considered including Tobias Smollett's novel, The Expedition of Humphrey Clinker, which is an epistolary novel about a grumpy rich guy with the gout, leaving his estate to travel around Britain for relief, and the friends he makes along the way. It's kind of a classic 18th century novel in that it's, you find out who this one character's father is, and there are all sorts of funny scenes. It's an epistolary novel. It's a picaresque, so a lot of random events and funny episodes. Smollett was great. His translation of Don Quixote was the one that I think the founding fathers liked to read. And I think I would probably pair that with Adam Smith, because there's a lot about economic development, economic change, the main character, Matt Bramble, is kind of grumpy, and he looks around and sees the social changes that are happening because of all this wealth, all this new wealth that's going around in the UK. And he doesn't like it because it's basically, he doesn't like how the nouveau riche behave. And so I'm not sure exactly how I would connect that to Smith, because I haven't thought about this deeply yet. But Smith seems like the natural connection, and I would probably develop some economic argument there. But it's also just wonderful because Smollett was Scottish, and there are a lot of funny attempts to defend Scotland against English prejudice in that novel too.
So in the back of the book, there are a couple of
Oh, yeah.
indices, because you could resist. I love
Yeah.
the if you like ... try.
Yeah,
So there are, he does.
I
the
forgot about
kind
that, thank you.
of B list that he.
Yeah,
couldn't
there are like
resist
another 30 novels I listed for that.
mentioning.
Yeah.
Yes, so there's a wealth of reading material in there, so, well, thank you so much for your
Thank you,
time.
Amy.
I
Yeah.
really